Alright, we're back here with another video. This one is called his family interrupted his anime, so he killed them. That is a crazy title, I'm not gonna lie.
When a 59-year-old unemployed shut-in was invested in some particularly good anime, he was enraged to have his father interrupt his moment by asking him for help. He responded to the situation by lashing out in the most extreme manner possible. While I have covered a few cases on this channel where crimes have led to anime getting cancelled and people who have worked on popular anime series have gotten into crime, this is probably the first time I've covered one in which anime was the reason that a crime was committed. To make things even more strange, this wasn't really due to the influence of the anime, but simply that it was being interrupted. Let's start back at the beginning. This is the story of a regular, working family of four that lived in Fukuoka, Japan. Fukuoka is in Kyushu, the southernmost of the main islands of the country. This is where an older couple, Hirokazu and Makie Matsumoto, decided to settle down and have a couple of kids. Hirokazu decided to get a job working in construction, while Makie ran a liquor store out of the first floor of their two-story home. Eventually, the couple went on to have two sons. The second son was named Junji Matsumoto. Born in 1962, he lived in the family home in Fukuoka for the entirety of his life, barely leaving the home unless absolutely necessary. According to those who knew him, he had always been a very quiet and introverted kid from the very beginning. When directly spoken to, even by a teacher in class, he would either freeze up and remain silent, or respond with "I don't feel well" and shut down. One of his classmates has since spoken out about a moment in the school revolving Junji that always stuck with him to this very day. When the teacher called out to the classroom and began to ask each student what they wanted to be when they grew up, Junji refused to answer. This classmate, curious as to why he wouldn't speak, asked him in private shortly after. He said, "When it came to his turn to answer, he didn't speak. Later on, I asked him what he wanted to be, and he told me he wanted to be a scientist. He was good at science and math." Apparently this was true, as Junji did go on to get into a pretty good prep school leading up to high school. Even after graduating from high school, he was able to secure a job very quickly, but it didn't last very long. Junji had some trouble getting used to the workplace and working alongside his co-workers, so he quit very shortly after joining. Both of the brothers would help Makie out with the home shop, and they continued to do so well into adulthood. This soon became the only way that Junji would ever mingle with the public in any sort of capacity. After losing his old job, he never found a new job outside the home again. For the next 40 years, he became what they call a NEET, meaning no education, employment, or training, meaning that he was basically doing nothing beyond helping out in the store and taking care of his aging parents. For several decades, this would become the status quo and things wouldn't change all that much. Junji's older brother, being the eldest son, was all set to take over the family liquor store once the parents decided to retire. However, things weren't going to go so smoothly. The elder brother began to have some pretty severe, unspecified mental health issues. This led to him being hospitalized time and time again over the years, eventually getting to the point where neither he or his parents felt that he would be capable of running things any longer. He moved to a completely different city and gradually lost contact with most of his family, closing himself off into his own little world. The family was now more or less down to 3, with the household consisting of Junji, his father, and his mother. As his parents got older, it came time to stop working. After all, both of them were now in their 80s. It was now time for Hirokazu to retire from his job, deciding to live the rest of his life by taking it easy. Makie then did much of the same, closing up the shop. Whether this was due to actually wanting to retire, being physically unable, or being unable to compete with local convenience stores is unclear, but either way the work was done. Now, the 3 family members were all left stuck in the same house with nothing to do. Things got even worse when Makie suffered a heart attack, having to be confined to a wheelchair for the rest of her life afterwards. For a while, Hirokazu took over doing the household chores and began to act as his wife's caretaker. In June of 2021, Hirokazu ended up suffering from his own problems as well. While riding his bicycle and doing some errands one day, he got into an accident and suffered a pretty severe head injury. He himself ended up in a wheelchair, leaving Junji with no choice but to become the caretaker of both of his elderly, handicapped, wheelchair-bound parents. It got to the point where he even had to feed them himself by hand. Junji, never really having had much responsibilities, didn't take it too well. The stress got to him immediately, and that stress only continued to grow. getting by on his parents' pensions, Junji decided to delve into escapism as much as he could to get some relief from the frustration and monotony of his daily life, like many people do. He would usually watch TV, taking an interest in anime specifically. He would even buy the manga that the shows he liked were based on and buy the DVDs associated with them, watching them over and over again. For these habits, his family would give him the equivalent of about $300 a month for the majority of his adulthood. Being around 2021, COVID soon exploded within Japan. Cases became more and more frequent by the day, leading to lockdowns all throughout the country. While many people took the lockdown fairly hard and got pretty stir-crazy, some took it harder than others. While before, Junji might have been able to escape his family by simply going out to buy some groceries, even that was becoming less of a possibility. He got more angry and frustrated as time went on. On June 20th, Junji was seen taking his mother out for a bit to buy some necessities. This would be the last time that anyone would ever see her alive. That night, Junji would erupt into a fury unlike any that his parents had ever seen. Junji was doing what he basically did any other day, sitting in the living room and watching anime on TV. His father, Hirokazu, came up to him and asked him for some help going to the restroom. Being at a very good point in the show, Junji did all he could in an attempt to ignore him. However, Hirokazu had been suffering from a lot of cognitive issues since his head injury. This would often lead to him repeating the same words and phrases over and over again. After his father called out to him numerous times while Junji was trying to focus on the show, he completely snapped. He stood up, grabbed an electric kettle, and ripped the cord out of it. He walked over to his 88-year-old father in his wheelchair, held up the cord, and strangled him with it in a rage. After a few moments, Hirokazu was gone. Junji then looked up and saw his mother. She had seen the whole thing. Knowing that she was a witness, he felt that he had no choice but to get rid of her too. He first put some black tape over her mouth and then grabbed the cord, killing her in the same way that he had just killed his father. Now, Junji was left in a quiet house with nothing to do but reflect on the reality of what he had just done. The murders weren't planned at all, so he had no idea what to do moving forward. He knew that he needed to do something about the bodies, but he didn't have many ideas. He decided to stack them on top of each other in an unplugged, horizontal fridge still down in the closed-down family shop on the first floor. He then took the rest of the tape he had used before and closed the refrigerator up tight. It seems that, after that, he simply went to sleep until the next day. The next day, Junji woke up and decided that he would need to tie up some loose ends in order to shake some suspicion off of himself. He called up a rehab center where his mother had an appointment that day and told them that he needed to cancel the appointment, saying that she was in bad health and needed to go into the hospital. 2 days later, on June the 23rd, Junji called the city welfare office and made a similar call. They had been planning to come out to the house for one reason or another, but Junji simply asked them if they could reschedule to a certain unspecified point in the future. Shortly after, Junji's neighbors saw him riding back and forth around the neighborhood on his bicycle. It's believed that, during this time, he was going back and forth to different banks and ATMs, withdrawing all the money he could from his parents' bank accounts. One of Junji's old classmates happened to see him while he was out, waving at him and shouting, "Long time no see," but Junji merely glanced at him before completely ignoring him and riding off into the distance. Junji had gone to the nearest train station, Hakata Station. He decided that he was going to make a break for it, but he didn't really know where he was going. He took the train all over the country, going as far north as Shizuoka, Yamagata, and Akita, spending well over an entire day on trains. He had nothing to do but sit in the continuously running trains and contemplate his next move, which he did for the next several days. One of Junji's relatives tried contacting the family several days after he fled on the 28th. Unable to get a hold of anyone, they asked the police to go out and perform a welfare check. Once the police got out there, it was evident to them that nobody was going to respond to their knocking. They made their way inside, and eventually they stumbled upon the suspiciously taped-up refrigerator. Opening up the fridge, they found Hirokazu and Makie's bodies in a very rough state of decay. They sent them off for an autopsy, but they were in such bad shape that a cause of death wasn't immediately clear. They began to interview anyone they could to find out who else lived at the residence. Seeing that the only other resident, the dead couple's son Junji, was missing, they had their prime suspect. For now, the police weren't certain that the couple were murdered, although common sense would lead them to believe that that was the case. They didn't have any evidence as of that moment, though, so they decided to seek out Junji in order to charge him with abandonment of a corpse.
Oh.
By now, Junji had ended his countrywide wandering spell and had gone farther back south, down to Kyoto. This is where he decided to simply book himself into a hotel with some of his parents' money that he had taken out. It's pretty likely that he didn't really have any plans going forward from that point, as he spent the next few weeks in this hotel. This gave the police plenty of time to track him down, as he stopped moving and going back and forth between different prefectures. Eventually, they were able to trace his movements back to the hotel, making their way out there to take him in for questioning on July 4th. They captured Junji there as they caught him outside in the parking lot. He was arrested for abandoning the corpses, but he surprised the police by fully admitting to the murders very shortly after the questioning began. He told them plainly that he had strangled his parents with an electrical cord and put them into the fridge. When asked why, he told them, "I wanted to escape from reality." Junji Matsumoto, 59 years old, was now on the verge of being hit with the charge of murder as well. As the police continued to question him as to why he did what he did, they were shocked to hear his reasoning. Junji looked them in the eye and told them that this was because he was tired of them continually interrupting his anime. He said to them, "It was bothering me that whenever I watched anime, my parents interrupted me. I couldn't stand it. During a good scene in an anime, my father repeatedly called for me to take care of him. After he complained about me, I killed him." He then told the police that he did very much the same thing to his mother shortly after, saying, "I killed her because she saw it all. I felt bad for just leaving her alone." And when they asked him what he did with the bodies, he told them, "There is no doubt that I hid my parents' bodies in the refrigerator I used to use." In July, Junji was rearrested, this time for the murder of his father. Then, in mid-August, he was once more arrested for the murder of his mother. He was stuck into police custody, where he wasn't going to be able to leave anytime soon. For a while, it wasn't even for sure if Junji would go to trial or not. After all, there was something clearly wrong with his mental state to lead him to all of this. The police decided to put him through some medical examinations to see if he would be fit to take part in a trial, and it was ultimately deemed that he was. Eventually, Junji's court date came around. He was facing either life in prison or being placed into a mental health facility indefinitely, depending on how the courts came to factor in his mental state. While in court, the judge spoke to Junji, getting back a number of brief and frank answers. The judge started by asking Junji his name.
Damn, this shit look kind of scary. Hold on now.
And his occupation, to which he simply responded with his name and by saying, "I am unemployed." The judge then asked him what he usually did while at home, leading to Junji responding with simple answers, such as, "I read manga, watch TV, and DVDs." The judge asked him if he ever went out, to which he got a flat no. He asked Junji if he had any friends to speak of, close or otherwise. Junji responded with a simple, "I do not." The judge asked him if he has ever hung out with anyone in the last 35 years, even just one time. Junji told him, "I have not." The judge, seemingly getting a bit frustrated, asked him if he and his father were very close. Junji didn't seem to think that they were. So the judge asked them what they usually talked about. Junji said that they never really spoke. The judge, a bit taken aback by what he had just heard given that they lived together, asked him, "You didn't talk with your father in 35 years?" To which Junji replied with, "Nothing you could really call a conversation." Finally, the judge simply asked Junji, "Why did you kill them?" Junji thought about it for a moment before raising his head and saying, "At that time, my brakes weren't working. Instead, I guess you could say I simply pressed on the accelerator and left things to my own fury." Junji's lawyer...
He think he in an anime. No, I know what his problem is. He think he in an anime. Man gonna say, "At the time, my brakes weren't working. Instead, I guess you could say I simply pressed
on the accelerator and left things to my own fury.
Man thinks he is. Man, he think he in an anime.
Junji's lawyer had planned on helping him get away with all of this by saying that he had a mental disorder, one that gave him trouble with interpersonal relationships specifically. However, neither the judge nor the prosecutors were really having any of it. The judge actually felt that Junji, social issues aside, was an evil and ruthless person, the lowest of the low. He said, "At that time, because he had to help his father go to the toilet at the expense of interrupting his own interests, he committed the crime. With a strong intention to kill, he strangled his parents to death without hesitation. The crime was quite heinous." It came to be known to the judge that Junji had developed a strong dislike for his father ever since he originally dropped out of college, quit working, and withdrew into his room all those years ago. At that time, his father scolded him pretty heavily, as many would. Junji, though, never forgot about it in almost 40 years. He let the hatred and rage build over time until it finally exploded over the most mundane of conflicts, leading to both of the deaths. While the judge stated that the crime was nothing short of unreasonable, the court did feel that Junji was not solely responsible for the problems that he had with his father, and that he killed both of his parents in a heat-of-the-moment, crime-of-passion type of murder. Even so, the judge felt that the maximum sentence available for the crime would be appropriate. It was ultimately decided that Junji Matsumoto would get a sentence of 30 years for both the murders and the abandonment of the corpses. While Junji's lawyers continued to protest, blaming his mental state, saying he was physically and mentally exhausted and did not decide to kill, the judge shut them down by ending with, "The defendant was aware of the illegality, as seen in his flight after the crime, and there is no reasonable doubt about his complete responsibility." Junji was carried
Only 35 years?
off to prison, where he remains to this day. Given that he was about 60 by the time the sentencing finally came around, he would be 90 years old by the time he is released, if he even makes it that long. Once again, thank you.
I guess that would be a life sentence. 35 years, he's going to be 90 when he gets out. I guess that you could say that's a life sentence, ain't it? I thought they would just give him life in prison. But he thinks he's in the anime. I'm telling you, in Japan, when you get arrested, you have to be shown on television. They blow out your handcuffs until you're proven guilty. Now, I don't know what that's supposed to do. In his near 60s and such a monumental man-child. Hey man, I don't know what you could do with him.
Axel. Young and
Gang. Grrr, bow. Niggas listening broke, this shit just be sad, so now these niggas got me mad.